The stars had never looked so close until humanity finally cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel. After 2 centuries of dreaming and 5 decades of failed experiments, Dr. Lisa Grant and her team at the International Space Research Facility had done what many thought impossible. The first successful test jump happened on a cold March morning, and within 6 months, Earth had constructed its first deep space vessel, capable of reaching distant star systems. They called it the UES Defiant, a name chosen to represent humanity's refusal to remain bound to a single world. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the viewscreen display the coordinates they had received 3 weeks earlier. The signal had come from deep space, a carefully structured mathematical sequence that could only be artificial. It was the moment humanity had waited for since the first human looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. The answer had finally come, and it was an invitation. The message contained specific coordinates and a date. Nothing more, but the implication was clear. Someone out there wanted to meet. Morrison was a veteran of the Earth Defense Force, a man who had spent 20 years preparing for threats that never came. He had commanded orbital stations and led peacekeeping missions on Earth. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. Standing beside him was Commander Amy Foster, his second-in-command and the best tactical officer in the fleet. She had argued for bringing more ships, for approaching with caution. But Earth's leadership had decided that first contact should be peaceful and non-threatening. 1 ship, 1 crew, 1 chance to make a good impression. The crew of the Defiant numbered 342 souls, the best and brightest that Earth had to offer. Engineers, scientists, linguists, diplomats, and soldiers, all working together toward a single goal. They had trained for 2 years, running through every possible scenario, learning basic mathematics and physics in formats that might be universal. Dr. Sophie Clark, the head linguist, had developed a computer program that could attempt communication through mathematical concepts and visual representations. Everyone was optimistic, excited, and perhaps a little naive about what they might find. The jump to the meeting coordinates took 6 hours, during which Morrison walked through the ship and spoke with his crew. He found Lieutenant Greg Palmer in the armory, checking weapons that Morrison hoped would never be needed. Palmer was a Marine, a professional soldier who believed in preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. He nodded at Morrison and continued his inventory without comment. In the science bay, Dr. Clark was reviewing her communication protocols for the 100th time, her hands shaking slightly with nervous energy. Morrison put a hand on her shoulder and told her she would do fine. When the Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the designated coordinates, the viewscreen filled with ships. Morrison counted 7 distinct vessel designs, each one massive beyond anything humanity had ever constructed. The smallest of them dwarfed the Defiant like an ocean liner next to a rowboat. They hung in space in a perfect formation, waiting. The bridge crew fell silent, staring at the impossible sight before them. Morrison took a deep breath and ordered the communications officer to broadcast their prepared greeting. The response came immediately, but it was not what anyone expected. A face appeared on the view screen, humanoid but clearly alien. The being had pale blue skin, for eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and a mouth that seemed too wide for its narrow face. It spoke in a language that the computer could not translate, harsh sounds that carried an unmistakable tone of contempt. Dr. Clark's communication program attempted to establish common ground through mathematical sequences, but the alien simply continued speaking. Then the transmission cut off. Morrison felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Commander Foster was already at her station, bringing up the tactical display. The alien ships were moving, adjusting their positions in a pattern that any military officer would recognize. It was an attack formation. Morrison opened a ship-wide channel and ordered all hands to battle stations. His voice steady, despite the fear clawing at his chest. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, but Morrison could see the confusion and terror in their eyes. This was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. The first shot came without further warning. A beam of brilliant green energy lanced across space and struck the Defiant's forward shield. The ship shuddered, and alarms began screaming throughout the bridge. Foster called out damage reports as Morrison demanded evasive maneuvers from the helmsman. The Defiant was fast for a human ship, but it was designed for exploration and research, not combat. The shields meant to protect against micrometeorites and radiation began failing under the sustained assault. Morrison ordered return fire, and the Defiant's limited weapons systems responded. Conventional missiles and laser batteries, primitive compared to what was being used against them, reached out toward the alien fleet. The projectiles were swatted aside by defensive systems that Morrison could barely understand. Energy fields caught the missiles and detonated them harmlessly. The lasers simply scattered across alien shields that seemed to bend light itself. More beams struck the Defiant, and now the ship was taking serious damage. Explosions ripped through the engineering section, killing 17 crew members in an instant. The artificial gravity failed in sections, and Morrison heard screams over the comm system as people were thrown against bulkheads. He gripped his command chair and watched helplessly as his ship was torn apart around him. Foster was shouting orders, trying to coordinate damage control, but there was nothing they could do. They were outgunned, outmatched, and dying. Morrison made the only decision he could. He ordered Dr. Clark to prepare an emergency transmission back to Earth. The communication systems were damaged, barely functional, but Clark worked with desperate speed to encode everything the Defiant had seen. The alien ships, their weapons, their formation, and most importantly, the fact that they had attacked without provocation. Morrison recorded a final message. His voice calm, even as the bridge filled with smoke and sparks rained from damaged consoles. The transmission was sent just as the alien fleet fired one final, devastating volley. Morrison saw the energy beams converge on his ship and felt the Defiant break apart beneath him. The last thing he heard was Foster calling his name, and then there was nothing but silence and the cold embrace of space. 342 lives ended in that moment. Humanity's first ambassadors to the stars, murdered by beings, saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed back on Earth. The transmission from the Defiant arrived at the command center in Geneva. President Helen Brooks was pulled from a midnight sleep to review the message. She watched Captain Morrison's final words, saw the alien ships destroying humanity's first deep space vessel, and felt something she had never experienced before. It was not fear or grief, though both of those emotions would come later. What Helen Brooks felt, watching humanity's peaceful mission end in senseless slaughter. It was a cold and terrible anger that would soon be shared by every person on Earth. The message from the alien fleet arrived, 12 hours after the Defiant's destruction. President Helen Brooks sat in the emergency command center beneath Geneva, surrounded by military advisors and world leaders connected through secure video feeds. The alien transmission played on every screen simultaneously. And though the words were now translated by Earth's computers, the meaning was brutally clear. Humanity was ordered to surrender all space-based technology, dismantle every satellite and station, and never again attempt to leave their world. Any violation would result in the complete destruction of Earth. The aliens gave humanity 72 hours to comply. Admiral Richard Cole stood at the far end of the command center, his weathered face showing no emotion as the transmission ended. He was 70 years old, a career military officer who had served in 3 different wars on Earth before taking command. Of the United Earth Fleet, he had seen the worst that humans could do to each other, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. When the room erupted in panicked discussions, Cole remained silent, waiting for the president to restore order. Helen Brooks raised her hand, and the room fell quiet. She looked directly at Cole and asked him a single question. Could Earth fight back? Cole walked to the main display and brought up a series of classified files that only a handful of people knew existed. For 30 years, he explained, a secret division of Earth's military had been developing weapons and technologies that were considered too dangerous for peacetime use. The projects had begun during the final days of the resource wars, when nations were desperate for any advantage. After peace was achieved, the research continued in hidden facilities, justified as preparation for unknown future threats. Now that threat had arrived. Cole believed humanity had tools that might level the battlefield. Dr. Lisa Grant entered the command center, surrounded by security. Personnel. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying for the crew she had sent into space aboard the Defiant. But when she began her briefing, her voice was steady and filled with cold determination. She explained that her team had developed quantum displac, emit warheads that could phase through conventional energy shields by existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. The mathematics were complex, but the application was simple. These weapons could ignore most known defensive systems. The second technology Grant described was the plasma railgun, a weapon that used electromagnetic acceleration to fire superheated matter at near-light speed. The projectiles carried both kinetic energy and extreme heat, creating devastation that conventional armor could not withstand. Earth had built prototypes, but never tested them in actual combat. The power requirements were enormous, requiring nearly all of a ship's reactor output for each shot. But the destructive potential was unlike anything humanity had ever created. Lieutenant Sophie Clark, who had survived the Defiant only because she had remained on Earth to monitor the mission, presented her cyber warfare capabilities. She had spent years studying the fragment of alien code that Earth had intercepted years ago from deep space transmissions. Clark believed she could create viruses and intrusion programs that might work against alien computer systems. It was theoretical, based on assumptions about how advanced civilizations might structure their networks. But it was a weapon that could turn the enemy's technology against them. The most controversial project was called Hammerfall, and it made several of the assembled leaders visibly uncomfortable. The system consisted of orbital platforms that could accelerate tungsten rods to incredible velocities and drop them on targets below. Each rod weighed several tons and would impact with the force of a nuclear weapon, but without the radiation. The platforms had been built in secret, disguised as communications satellites, and were already in position around Earth. Admiral Cole made it clear that Hammerfall could target alien ships in orbit or conduct planetary bombardment if humanity ever needed to. Strike at alien worlds. President Brooks listened to every presentation without interruption. When the briefings concluded, she stood and addressed the room with a voice that carried the weight of 8 billion lives. Earth would not surrender, she declared. Humanity had reached for the stars in peace and been answered with violence. If the aliens wanted war, then war they would have, and the price would be higher than they could imagine. She authorized the immediate mobilization of every military resource on the planet and gave Admiral Cole complete authority to prosecute the coming conflict. The world's response was unprecedented. Every nation contributed ships, weapons, personnel, and resources to the United Earth Fleet. Factory lines that had been producing civilian goods were converted overnight to military production. Shipyards that had been building orbital habitats began constructing warships instead. Young men and women volunteered in numbers that overwhelmed the recruitment centers. Humanity had been fractured by centuries of conflict and competition, but the alien threat united them in a way that nothing else ever had. Commander Daniel Hayes reported to the pilot training facility at Edwards Air Force Base, where he found himself looking at the most advanced fighter craft ever designed. The F-90 Valkyrie was sleek and deadly, equipped with quantum torpedoes and plasma cannons, powered by fusion engines that could push the craft to speeds that would kill most pilots without the advanced inertial dampening systems. Hayes had been a test pilot before the Defiant's destruction, and now he was tasked with training Strike Wing Alpha, an elite squadron that would spearhead humanity's counterattack. The training was brutal and compressed, cramming months of instruction into weeks. Hayes pushed his pilots to their limits and beyond, knowing that any weakness would mean death when they faced the aliens. The Valkyrie fighters were responsive and powerful, but they required absolute precision and nerves of steel. Several pilots washed out, unable to handle the extreme forces or the psychological pressure. Those who remained formed a bond stronger than family. United by their mission and their anger at what had been done to the Defiant's crew, Captain Amy Foster, one of only 7 survivors from the Defiant who had not been aboard during the final mission, took command of the destroyer U.S. Vengeance. The ship was fresh from the construction yards. Armed with the new plasma railguns and protected by layered shield systems that combined human and adapted alien technology reverse-engineered from old. Foster had watched her friends and colleagues die on the view screen, powerless to help them. Now she had a ship and a crew, and she intended to make the aliens regret every life they had taken. Lieutenant Greg Palmer assembled the 1st Marine Assault Battalion, a force specifically trained for boarding actions and close-quarters combat in space. Palmer knew that humanity's advantage would not come from matching the aliens, ship to ship, but from doing things the aliens would never expect. His Marines trained in zero gravity, learned to breach alien hull designs, and practiced room-clearing techniques adapted for extraterrestrial environments. They would be the spear tip that struck at the heart of enemy vessels. Sophie Clark worked 18-hour days in the Cyber Warfare Division, creating sophisticated intrusion programs based on the limited alien data available. She knew her success rate would be low at first, but every alien system she could compromise would save human lives. Her team prepared packages designed to corrupt navigation systems, disable weapons, and spread chaos through enemy communications. It was a new kind of warfare, fighting not with guns, but with code and mathematics. Admiral Cole coordinated everything from his flagship, the massive carrier U.S. Retribution. The ship was the largest vessel humanity had ever built, capable of carrying 40 Valkyrie fighters and equipped with enough firepower to level a small continent. Cole walked the corridors daily, speaking with crew members, learning names, and making sure everyone understood what they were fighting for. He had no illusions about the cost of the coming war. Many would die, perhaps most. But humanity would not go extinct quietly, intelligence reports from long range. Sensors located the nearest alien facility, a monitoring station designated Sentinel Prime. The base was positioned at the edge of Council-controlled space, monitoring the sector that included Earth. It was heavily defended according to the data, considered impregnable by alien standards. Cole studied the intelligence and made his decision. Earth would strike first, and they would strike hard. The aliens expected submission or desperate defensive fighting. They would get neither. Humanity would bring the war to them and show the galaxy that Earth was not prey to be hunted. The fleet assembled in orbit above Earth, dozens of ships representing humanity's hope and fury. President Brooks gave a final address that was broadcast worldwide, her words simple and powerful. She spoke of Captain Morrison and the crew of the Defiant, of humanity's right to exist among the stars, and of the strength that came from unity. When she finished, the fleet began its jump sequence. They were going to Sentinel Prime, and the aliens would learn that attacking Earth had been the worst mistake they would ever make. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sentinel Prime system, and every sensor on every ship immediately began recording data. Admiral Richard Cole stood on the bridge of the U.S. Retribution, watching the massive alien station appear on the view screen. It was larger than anything Earth had ever built, a construct of metal and energy that hung in space like a small moon. Around it orbited 23 warships, the same design that had destroyed the Defiant. Cole felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained calm as he ordered the fleet to assume attack formation. Subcommander Vex of the Galactic Council was reviewing routine patrol reports when his sensors detected the human fleet. He looked at the display with mild curiosity, noting the primitive design of the human vessels and their laughably small numbers. The humans had brought perhaps 30 ships against his 23 warships, plus the station's formidable defenses. Dex had served the Council for 40 years, and had seen countless species attempt resistance before accepting their place in the galactic order. He activated the communication system and prepared to offer the humans one final chance to surrender before he obliterated them. Commander, Daniel Hayes sat in the cockpit of his Valkyrie fighter, feeling the engines thrumming beneath him as Strike-Wing Alpha prepared to launch. Behind him, 19 other pilots ran through their final checks, their voices crisp and professional over the squadron channel. Hayes had trained these men and women personally, and he knew every one of their strengths and weaknesses. They were ready, or as ready as anyone could be, for their first real combat against an enemy that considered them inferior. Hayes listened to the launch countdown, felt his heartbeat slow as his training took over. The Retribution's launch bays opened, and Strike Wing Alpha shot into space like bullets from a gun. The Valkyrie fighters accelerated at rates that would have crushed unprotected humans. But the inertial dampening systems kept the pilots safe as they reached speeds no alien fighter could match. Hayes led his squadron in a wide arc around the fleet, using the larger ships as cover while they approached the alien defensive line. The enemy ships were moving now, adjusting their formation to meet the human threat. But their movements were slow and predictable. Dex watched the small human fighters launch and felt a moment of contempt. The Council had fought fighter-based tactics before, thousands of years ago, and had learned that small craft were ineffective against properly shielded capital ships. He ordered his defensive screens to full power and commanded his weapons officers to prepare a coordinated volley that would sweep the primitive fighters from space. The humans would learn this lesson quickly, and then his warships would dismantle their fleet piece by piece. Hayes saw the alien ships, powering their weapons, and gave the order to attack. Strike Wing Alpha broke formation and scattered, each fighter taking an independent vector that made targeting them nearly impossible. The quantum torpedoes launched in a synchronized spread, 20 missiles that phased in and out of normal space as they crossed the distance to their targets. The alien point defense systems fired, tracking the torpedoes with perfect accuracy. But the weapons simply passed through the defensive fire as if it did not exist. Vex had one moment of confusion before the torpedoes struck his ships, passing through their shields like ghosts and detonating inside the hulls. 4 alien warships died in the first strike, torn apart from within by explosions that their armor could not contain. The remaining ships broke formation in shock, commanders unable to understand how their defenses had failed so completely. Hayes pulled his Valkyrie into a tight spiral, avoiding return fire by margins measured in meters, and selected his next target. His fighter's plasma cannons spun up, drawing power from the fusion core, and he fired at an alien cruiser that was trying to bring its main guns to bear on the Retribution. Captain Amy Foster commanded the destroyer wing from the bridge of the UES, and when she saw the alien formation collapse, she gave the order to advance. 6 destroyers surged forward, their plasma railguns charging with a sound that vibrated through every deck. The weapons fired in sequence, superheated bolts of matter accelerated to impossible speeds crossing space in heartbeats. The alien shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb kinetic impacts, had no defense against weapons that were both. The plasma burned through shields and armor alike, and 2 more alien ships were crippled in seconds. Dex was screaming orders into his communication system, demanding that his ships regroup and focus their fire. The humans were using weapons and tactics that made no sense according to Council warfare doctrine. How were their missiles passing through shields? How were their energy weapons penetrating defenses that had withstood centuries of testing? He ordered the station's main cannon to target the human carrier, determined to destroy their command ship and break their morale. The massive weapon began cycling up, drawing power from the station's reactor. Lieutenant Sophie Clark sat in the intelligence ship U.S. Ghost, surrounded by computer screens displaying alien communication traffic. She had been waiting for this moment, and when the alien networks began flooding with panicked transmissions, she struck. Her intrusion programs were loaded into tight beam transmissions and fired at the alien ships, slipping through their communication ports disguised as standard tactical data. The programs began to execute, spreading through alien computer systems. Like a virus through an unprotected body, the alien tactical network crashed in seconds. False sensor readings appeared on every screen, showing human ships where there were none, and masking the real positions of Foster's destroyers. Targeting solutions became corrupted, causing weapons to fire at empty space. Ship-to-ship coordination collapsed as the communication system filled with garbage data and contradictory orders. Dex watched his organized defense dissolve into chaos, and for the first time in his long career, he felt genuine fear. Hayes brought his Valkyrie around for another attack, run and saw the station's main cannon tracking toward the Retribution. He made an instant decision and broke from his assigned target, pushing his fighter's engines past their safety limits. The Valkyrie screamed across space, and Hayes fired every remaining torpedo directly at the cannon's focusing array. The quantum warhead struck home, and the massive weapon exploded in a cascade of energy that tore a crater in the station's surface. Admiral Cole watched the battle unfold from his command chair, his experienced eyes tracking every element of the engagement. The plan was working better than he had dared to hope, but he knew the critical moment was approaching. The alien ships were damaged and confused, but they were not defeated. He ordered Captain Greg Palmer to launch the boarding teams. And across the fleet, Marine assault shuttles detached from their carriers and began burning toward the crippled alien vessels. Palmer stood in the lead shuttle, gripping his rifle and checking his armor seals one final time. Around him sat 20 Marines, the best soldiers Earth had produced, armed with weapons designed for the brutal reality of ship-to-ship combat. The shuttle shook as it dodged defensive fire, and then the magnetic clamps engaged with a solid thunk as they locked onto an alien hull. Palmer's team breached the hull with shaped charges and poured through the opening into a corridor. It's filled with atmosphere and gravity. The aliens inside were not prepared for boarding actions. Their military doctrine had not included close-quarters combat for generations, relying instead on their superior ships and technology. Palmer's Marines moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, their training and aggression overwhelming the confused defenders. Within minutes, they had secured the engineering section and were fighting their way toward the command center. Dex abandoned his burning ship in an escape pod, watching through the small viewport as human soldiers swarmed through vessels that were supposed to be impregnable. Half his fleet was destroyed or captured, and Sentinel Prime was crippled and burning. He had sent a distress signal to the Council, but he knew help would not arrive in time. The humans had done the impossible. Nex understood with horrible clarity that the Council had made a catastrophic mistake. The battle lasted 3 hours from first shot to final surrender. Admiral Cole stood among the wreckage of the alien command center aboard Sentinel Prime, where Palmer's Marines had captured Dex and prevented the station's self-destruct sequence. Around him, technical teams were downloading every piece of data they could find. Information about Council technology and territory that would prove invaluable in the coming war. The human fleet had lost 3 ships and 47 personnel. Losses that hurt deeply, but paled in comparison to the complete destruction of the alien. Garrison.Cole activated the station's long-range communication system and recorded a message to the Galactic Council. His words were simple and clear, translated into the alien language by the captured computer systems. Earth had not wanted war, but since war had been forced upon them, they would prosecute it with every means at their disposal. The destruction of Sentinel Prime was not a victory to celebrate, but a warning to deliver. Any further attacks on humanity would be met with overwhelming retaliation, and the Council would learn that Earth was not a species to be trifled with or dismissed. The message was broadcast across every Council frequency, and Cole ordered the fleet to withdraw before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The human ships jumped back into faster-than-light travel, carrying their wounded, their captured intelligence, and the knowledge that they had struck the first real blow in a war that would reshape the galaxy. Behind them, Sentinel Prime burned in the darkness, a monument to the price of underestimating humanity. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened on Concordia, the ancient capital world that had stood for 10,000 years as the center of civilized space. 7 species sat in the Great Chamber. The representatives gathered in a circle that symbolized their supposed equality and unity. The holographic display at the center of the room showed the burning wreckage of Sentinel Prime, images that had been broadcast across every communication channel in Council space. The silence in the chamber was heavy with shock and disbelief, broken only by the quiet hum of translation systems, converting speech between the various languages. Counselor Vaughn of the Hectarian Empire stood first, his forearms gesturing with barely controlled rage. He was the one who had ordered the attack on the Defiant, convinced that a show of overwhelming force would bring the humans into line like every other primitive species the Council had encountered. Now he faced the reality that his decision had triggered a conflict that cost hundreds of Council lives and destroyed one of their most important monitoring stations. Varn demanded immediate retaliation, calling for the assembly of a massive fleet that would crush Earth and make an example of humanity that would echo across the galaxy for centuries. Counselor
Almera
of the Zenthari Union rose slowly, her scaled face showing the deep concern that Varn seemed incapable of feeling. She had reviewed every second of recorded data from the Sentinel Prime battle, analyzing the human tactics and technology with the careful attention her species was known for. Mira spoke in measured tones, explaining that humanity possessed weapons and strategies that the Council had never encountered. Their missiles ignored shields, their energy weapons combined heat and kinetic force in ways that conventional defenses could not handle, and their cyber warfare capabilities had turned the Council's own technology against them. She warned that underestimating Earth again could lead to catastrophic losses. The other counselors erupted into argument, some supporting Varn's call for overwhelming force, while others sided with Myra's caution. The Dravik representative, a warrior species that valued strength above all else, insisted that the Council's honor demanded a crushing response. The Quillan delegate, whose people had not fought a war in 3,000 years, suggested opening diplomatic channels and finding a peaceful resolution. The debate raged for hours while the holographic images of Sentinel Prime's destruction played on endless repeat, a reminder of what was at stake. On Earth, Admiral Richard Cole stood in the command center reviewing intelligence data that had been extracted from Sentinel Prime's computers. Dr. Lisa Grant sat beside him, her face pale as she read through the tactical assessments and fleet compositions. The news was worse than anyone had hoped. The Galactic Council commanded over 300 warships spread across their territory, with the ability to concentrate that force anywhere they chose. Earth's entire fleet numbered fewer than 80 ships, most of them built in desperate haste over the past months. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple, and they did not favor humanity. Lieutenant Sophie Clark entered the room, carrying a datapad that contained the most critical piece of intelligence they had recovered. She had found files detailing something called the Grand Armada, a combined fleet that the Council assembled only for existential threats. The Armada had never been defeated in the entire recorded history of Council conflicts, and according to the files, it had been used to subjugate 17 different species over the past 5,000 years. Clark's voice shook slightly as she explained that the Council would almost certainly deploy the Grand Armada against Earth in response to Sentinel Prime's destruction. President Helen Brooks joined the meeting via secure transmission from the United Nations building in New York. She looked older than she had just months ago, the weight of leadership during wartime showing in every line of her face. She listened to the intelligence briefing without interruption, and when it concluded, she asked the only question that mattered. Could Earth survive an attack by the Grand Armada? Cole did not answer immediately, and his silence spoke volumes. Dr. Grant stood and walked to the main display, bringing up schematics of a project that had been in development for only 6 weeks. She called it the Genesis Array, a network of satellites equipped with experimental gravity manipulation technology. The theory was sound, but the practical application was untested and potentially catastrophic. The array could generate artificial gravity wells in space, creating distortions that would pull ships off course and disrupt their ability to maneuver. Used correctly, it could turn Earth's orbital space into a death trap for incoming fleets. Used incorrectly, it could tear holes in space-time that might never close. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Commander Daniel Hayes, present for the briefing after returning from Sentinel Prime, asked the obvious question about what would happen if the Genesis Array malfunctioned. Grant answered honestly that worst-case scenarios included the destruction of Earth's moon, the collapse of orbital mechanics throughout the solar system, or the creation of a permanent spatial anomaly that would make the entire region uninhabitable. The risks were enormous. But without the array, Earth had no realistic chance of surviving a full Council assault. Admiral Cole outlined his strategy with the clinical precision of a career military officer. Earth could not win a conventional engagement against the Grand Armada, so they would not fight one. Instead, They would use every advantage at their disposal to create an asymmetric battlefield, where numbers mattered less than tactics and technology. The human fleet would lure the Council forces deep into the solar system, using hit-and-run attacks to draw them toward Earth. Once the enemy fleet was committed, the Genesis Array would activate and turn their formation into chaos. In that moment of confusion, Earth would strike with everything they had. Captain Amy Foster raised concerns about civilian casualties if the battle took place in Earth's orbital space. Cole acknowledged the risk, but explained that evacuating the orbital stations and withdrawing all civilian traffic was already underway. Earth's cities would be vulnerable during the battle. Keeping the fight away from the planet's surface was impossible given the strategic requirements. Every person on Earth understood that they were fighting for survival, and survival sometimes required terrible choices. Lieutenant Greg Palmer was assigned to prepare boarding teams for what Cole called the critical strike. If the opportunity presented itself during the chaos of battle, human Marines would attempt to capture the Council's command ship and take their leadership hostage. It was a desperate plan with a low probability of success. But Palmer had learned during the Sentinel Prime assault that alien ships were vulnerable to determined infantry in ways their designers had never anticipated. He began selecting personnel and planning approach vectors, knowing that his teams would face the most dangerous mission in human history. Sophie Clark returned to her cyber warfare division and began preparing the most sophisticated intrusion packages her team could devise. She had learned from the Sentinel Prime engagement that alien computer systems were vulnerable to certain types of attacks, but the Council would undoubtedly be upgrading their defenses in response. Clark's new programs were designed to be adaptive, learning from enemy countermeasures in real time and evolving to overcome them. It was cutting-edge work that pushed the boundaries of artificial intelligence research. But there was no time for caution or extensive testing. On Concordia, the Council's debate finally ended when Councillor Varn called for a formal vote on military action. The motion passed with only Councillor Mira dissenting, her voice lost among the calls for retribution. Battle Commander Krell of the Dravok species was summoned to the chamber and given his orders. He would assemble the Grand Armada and lead it to Earth, where he would offer the humans one final chance to surrender before destroying their world. Krell accepted the assignment with pride, viewing it as an opportunity to cement his legacy as the warrior who brought the upstart humans to heel. The Grand Armada began assembling at a staging point 300 light-years from Earth. Warships from all 7 Council species gathered in a display of power that had not been seen in living memory. Krell walked the decks of his flagship, inspecting troops and equipment with the eye of a veteran warrior. He had fought in 17 major engagements during his career and never lost a battle. The humans had won a single engagement through surprise and unconventional tactics. But against the full might of Council military power, they would crumble like every other species before them. Admiral Cole received confirmation that the Grand Armada was moving toward Earth, and he gave the order to begin final preparations. Project Hammerfall's orbital platforms were brought to full readiness, their tungsten rods loaded and targeting systems calibrated. The Genesis Array satellites were positioned throughout Earth's orbital space, their experimental gravity generators tested and retested until the engineers were as confident as they could be. The human fleet took up defensive positions beyond Jupiter, ready to begin the fighting retreat that would draw the Council forces into the trap. President Brooks addressed the people of Earth one final time before the battle. She spoke from the Oval Office, her words broadcast to every nation and every language. She reminded humanity of everything they had accomplished, from the first tools chipped from stone to the starships that now defended their home. She spoke of courage and sacrifice, of the crew of the Defiant who had died reaching out in peace, and of the debt the living owed to the dead. When she finished, 8 billion people waited in their homes and shelters, knowing that the next days would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars or would be extinguished like a candle in the wind. Commander Hayes sat in his Valkyrie fighter aboard the Retribution, running through pre-flight checks for what felt like the 100th time. Strike Wing Alpha was ready. every pilot aware that they would be flying into the largest space battle in human history against impossible odds. Hayes looked at the small photograph attached to his instrument panel. A picture of Earth taken from orbit showing the blue marble that held everything humanity had ever known. He sealed his helmet and waited for the order to launch, ready to fight and die if necessary to protect that fragile world. The Grand Armada emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, and the sight was magnificent in its terrible beauty. 300 warships representing 7 alien civilizations spread across space in a formation that had crushed 17 species over 5,000 years. Battle Commander Krell stood on the bridge of his flagship, observing the distant blue world that had defied the Galactic Council. He activated the long-range communication system and broadcast his ultimatum, offering Earth one final chance to surrender before their cities burned and their civilization ended. Admiral Richard Cole received the transmission aboard the UES Retribution, positioned with the human fleet near Jupiter's orbit. He listened to Krell's demands without expression, then opened a channel that would broadcast his response across every frequency. His words were brief and delivered with absolute conviction. "Come and take it." The challenge echoed through space, and Cole gave the order for the human fleet to engage. What Krell saw as arrogance was actually determination forged in the fires of humanity's bloodiest conflicts, a refusal to submit that ran deeper than the alien commander could comprehend. The Grand Armada advanced into the solar system with the confidence of inevitable victory. Krell's strategy was simple and had proven effective countless times before. His fleet would push through any resistance, destroy the defending forces, and position itself in orbit around Earth, where the threat of planetary bombardment would force surrender. The humans had perhaps 80 ships against his 300. Primitive vessels that had won a single battle through luck and surprise. This time there would be no surprises. The numerical advantage was overwhelming. Commander Daniel Hayes led Strike Wing Alpha in the opening engagement. Launching from the Retribution, as the Council fleet approached Jupiter, the Valkyrie fighters accelerated to attack speed. Weaving through the massive gas giants' rings where the debris and magnetic fields created a navigation nightmare for the larger alien vessels. Hayes fired his quantum torpedoes at the Vanguard ships, watching the weapons phase through shields and detonate inside alien hulls. Explosions blossomed in the darkness. But there were so many targets that even successful strikes seemed insignificant against the armadas. Captain Amy Foster commanded the destroyer wing in hit and run attacks that struck the Council fleet from unexpected angles. The UES Vengeance and 5 sister ships would appear from behind asteroids or moons, fire their plasma railguns in devastating volleys, and retreat before the enemy could concentrate their return fire. Each attack destroyed or damaged Council vessels, but Foster knew they were buying time rather than winning battles. The plan required drawing the Armada deeper into the solar system. Every engagement pulled them closer to Earth. Krell watched his formation take losses and felt irritation rather than concern. The human tactics were annoying, but ultimately futile. He had lost perhaps 30 ships in the running battles through the outer system, a mere 10% of his force. The humans were being ground down steadily, their fleet reduced to fewer than 60 operational vessels. Krell ordered his ships to maintain formation and continue the advance. Earth was now visible on his tactical displays, a tempting prize that would soon be within weapons range. Lieutenant Sophie Clark launched her cyber warfare assault as the Grand Armada crossed Mars orbit. The intrusion programs were more sophisticated than those used at Sentinel Prime, designed to infiltrate slowly and spread through networked systems before revealing their presence. Clark watched her screens as the digital infection took hold, jumping from ship to ship through the Council's communication network. When she activated the attack sequence, chaos erupted throughout the alien fleet as sensors failed and targeting systems reported false data. The human fleet made its stand-in, or its orbital space, every remaining ship positioned according to Admiral Cole's precise instructions. The battered vessels looked insignificant compared to the massive armada bearing down on them. But Cole was not counting on conventional firepower to win this battle. He waited until the Council fleet committed fully to the engagement. Their ships packed into a formation designed to overwhelm the human defensive line. Then he gave Dr. Lisa Grant the order she had been waiting for. Activate the Genesis Array. The satellites orbiting Earth came online simultaneously. Their experimental gravity generators creating artificial wells in the fabric of space. Reality itself seemed to bend as invisible forces pulled at the Council ships from multiple directions. Krell's perfect formation disintegrated as vessels were yanked off course, colliding with each other or spinning helplessly as their navigation systems struggled to compensate. The armada that had appeared invincible moments before descended into complete disorder. Battle Commander. Krell screamed orders at his crew, demanding they regain control and restore formation. His flagship shuddered as a gravity well caught it, pulling the massive warship into a slow spiral. Around him, ships crashed into one another with devastating force, their shields useless against physical impacts at close range. The tactical display showed his fleet scattered across thousands of kilometers, every vessel fighting its own battle against forces they could not see or understand. Admiral Cole watched the chaos unfold and activated Project Hammerfall. The orbital platforms that had been disguised as communication satellites revealed their true purpose. Launching tungsten rods that had been accelerated to incredible velocities by electromagnetic propulsion, the kinetic bombardment tore through the disorganized Council fleet like knives through paper. Ships that had survived humanity's missiles and plasma cannons were ripped apart by solid metal traveling at speeds that made them unstoppable. Dozens of alien vessels died in seconds, their crews never knowing what killed them. Commander Hayes led Strike Wing Alpha into the heart of the devastated armada, his pilots exploiting the confusion to devastating effect. The Valkyrie fighters moved through the chaos with practiced precision, targeting command ships and weapons platforms that were struggling to recover from the gravitational disruption. Hayes emptied his torpedo magazines into a Hectarian battlecruiser, watching it break apart under the internal explosions. Around him, the squadron accounted for 17 confirmed kills in the space of 10 minutes. Lieutenant Greg Palmer's Marines launched their boarding assault in the midst of the battle, their shuttles racing toward Krell's flagship while it struggled against the gravity wells. Palmer knew this was the moment Cole had planned for. When the enemy command structure was vulnerable and unable to respond effectively, the shuttle's magnetic clamps locked onto the alien hull. Shape charges blew through the armor, and Palmer led his team into corridors filled with confused and disorganized defenders. The fighting inside the flagship was brutal in close quarters. Exactly the kind of combat where human aggression and adaptability gave them the advantage. Palmer's Marines pushed through bulkheads and cleared compartments with ruthless efficiency. The aliens fought back with weapons that were powerful but poorly suited for shipboard combat. Within 20 minutes, Palmer's team had fought their way to the command center where they found Krell trying desperately to coordinate a shattered fleet. Krell turned to face the humans who had breached his bridge, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt true defeat. The legendary warrior who had never lost a battle was captured by soldiers from a species the Council had dismissed as primitive. Palmer secured the alien commander and sent word to Admiral Cole that the enemy flagship was under human control. Around them, the battle was turning into a massacre as the Council fleet tried to retreat but found themselves trapped by the same gravity wells that had destroyed their formation. Captain Foster brought the Vengeance alongside, a Council cruiser that was listing helplessly, its engines damaged and navigation offline. She gave the vessel a chance to surrender, and to her surprise, the alien crew, ACC, TID immediately. More ships began broadcasting surrender signals as the reality of their situation became clear. The Grand Armada that was supposed to crush humanity had been reduced to burning wreckage and captured vessels in less than 2 hours of fighting. Admiral Cole stood among the ruins of the Councils, pride, and watched surviving enemy ships fleeing the solar system in disorder. The human fleet had lost 19 vessels and over 2,000 personnel, losses that hurt deeply but paled in comparison to the devastation inflicted on the Council. More than 200 alien warships were destroyed or captured, and Battle Commander Krell was prisoner aboard a human vessel. Cole activated the communication systems and prepared to send a message that would be heard across the entire galaxy. His words were measured and clear, broadcast on every frequency the Council used. Earth had sought peace and been answered with violence. Humanity had defended itself with every weapon and tactic at their disposal, and the result was visible in the wreckage floating through their orbital space. Cole declared that Earth desired no empire and sought no conquest, but would never again ask permission to exist among the stars. Any species that threatened humanity would face the same fate as the Grand Armada. The age of Council dominance was over. A new voice would be heard in galactic affairs. On Concordia, the remaining counselors watched Cole's transmission in stunned silence. Counselor Varn, architect of the disastrous war, was removed from his position and placed under arrest for his catastrophic decisions. Counselor Myra stood before the assembled representatives and proposed something that would have been unthinkable just days before. She moved that humanity be offered full membership in the Galactic Council with equal status and voting rights. The motion passed unanimously, the counselors understanding that the alternative was a war they could not win. President Helen Brooks received the Council's offer in the Oval Office. Surrounded by advisors who had guided Earth through the darkest days of the conflict, she read the terms carefully, noting that the Council was offering everything humanity had wanted from the beginning: peace, recognition, and the right to explore and expand without restriction. Brooks accepted the offer, but made it clear that Earth would be an equal partner in galactic governance, not a subordinate species grateful for scraps. A memorial service was held for Captain Jake Morrison and the crew of the Defiant, the men and women whose deaths had sparked the war that changed everything. Morrison was posthumously named Earth's first ambassador to the stars, honored not for the diplomatic contact he never got to make, but for the sacrifice that revealed humanity's true strength. His name would be remembered alongside the greatest explorers and heroes in human history. Commander Hayes stood beside his Valkyrie fighter in the Retribution's hangar bay, preparing for humanity's first authorized deep space patrol beyond the solar system. Strikewing Alpha would fly escort for diplomatic vessels, making contact with species who now knew Earth as equals rather than primitives. Hayes looked at the starfield visible through the hangar opening and thought about everything that had changed in just a few short months. Humanity had reached for the stars in peace and been forced to fight for their right to exist. But they had won that fight in a way that left no doubt about their capabilities. Dr. Lisa Grant deactivated the Genesis Array satellites and began the careful process of dismantling the dangerous technology. The array had served its purpose, but represented a threat that Grant was unwilling to leave active. Earth would develop new defenses based on proven technology rather than experimental systems that could destroy as easily as protect. The weapons that won the war would be studied and improved, but always with the understanding that they existed to prevent conflict rather than wage it. Admiral Cole retired from active service 6 months after the war ended. His mission accomplished and his duty fulfilled. He spent his final days in uniform ensuring that the next generation of officers understood the lessons learned in blood and fire. War was never the first choice, but when forced upon you, it had to be fought with absolute commitment. Half measures and hesitation cost lives, while determination and innovation saved them. The United Earth Fleet would carry those lessons forward as humanity expanded into the galaxy. The galaxy had tried to silence humanity before they could speak, tried to extinguish their light before it could shine. Instead, Earth had declared itself in the only language the Council understood. Through strength and courage and an absolute refusal to surrender, the stars belong to humanity now, not by permission, but by right of conquest earned against impossible odds. And across the galaxy, every species that heard the story of Earth's fierce retaliation understood one simple truth: humanity had arrived, and the universe would never be the same.